Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. On Tuesday, 140 CEOs of the top companies in South Africa pledged to renew their financial and practical support for President Cyril Ramaphosa's Presidential Project Management Office. This is a powerful office inside the presidency that coordinates some projects with Treasury through what is being called Operation Vulindlela. To be quite honest, we're not talking enough about all of this, and you need to be aware and do your own research to appreciate what is happening. The media is not covering this enough, and that's partly because some of the media companies responsible for covering the administration and politics in South Africa are part of the companies who are pledging money and support to the Presidential Project Management Office. So what is the support that I've been talking about? The essence of the support is that these CEOs will put money into a special fund. The fund is known as the Resource Mobilization Fund. The Resource Mobilization Fund is a donation fund which has been set up by organized business at the request of the president. The fund is chaired by Martin Kingston. Martin Kingston is the executive chairman of Rothschild & Co. South Africa, and he's a partner of the Rothschild & Co. Group with responsibility for Africa. So, a little more facts about him. Prior to joining Rothschild & Co. in 2007, Martin Kingston worked at Morgan Grenfell and advanced to executive chairman and head of global banking at Dutch Bank, South Africa. He's worked effectively for 4 years in investment banking within this large international investment banking organization. So more about the RMF, or the Resource Mobilization Fund. The Resource Mobilization Fund was launched in March of 2023 to fund the activities of the National Energy Crisis Committee, NECOM. In 2023, 250 million rands were raised for this fund. And this week, another 250 million was raised and or pledged for the fund from the business leaders. The RMF is used to procure and contract expertise for the President's Project Management Office. What is this money used for? The money is used for paying consultants to perform various tasks such as energy modeling, communications with the public relations, developing energy policy, legal advisory work, and project management. Public relations is something that you need to keep an eye on, because how you interpret everything that is happening is also influenced by the machinery of communications used by public relations experts who are being paid for by these business leaders. Typically, consultants charge higher rates than the cost of public sector experts working for governments who earn salaries. There are also several other people who are working in the presidency who are being paid by business, and these roles are being referred to as secondments. Secondments, yes. The people who are working in secondments are effectively people who are being paid by companies or organizations outside of the presidency. Not all secondments are paid, and some, like Ramaphosa's red tape czar, Sipho Nkosi, are said to be working for free on a voluntary basis. However, I don't think that anyone works for free on a voluntary basis without that serving an interest that they either declare or don't declare. But we'll talk about that later. So this whole partnership is being called the Government Business Partnership. And the launch of the second phase was very well attended. Very powerful people in business went there, right? So the partnership has also set targets to support the government to achieve goals in 3 focus areas that they care about. These focus areas are the following. Number 1, energy. Particularly, they want to maintain zero load shedding. They want to add 4,000 megawatts of additional private sector generation, IPPs, and to assist Eskom to build 1,000 kilometers of new transmission lines, because these IPPs typically need to be connected to the main grid. So that's number 1. Logistics. stabilizing under logistics, which is their second goal, stabilizing strategic rail freight corridors, assisting Transnet's quick win strategy, and identifying opportunities for private participation in rail, assisting with regulatory reform. Translating this, what they're trying to say is that they are intending to have the private sector own the railway system, and they want assistance with allowing that to become legal. Whenever you hear about participation of the private sector, it's basically privatization. They don't like to use that word privatization because it has negative connotations based on how it has played out in other parts of the world, leading to worse service delivery as well as more expensive service delivery. The UK energy sector is an example. The UK water sector is another example, where there was large privatization under Margaret Thatcher, and it led to disaster and chaos. And you can go onto UK YouTube or UK news websites and you'll see that it's so bad. There's sewage in the Thames River, basically, as a result of all of these privatization efforts. And Thames Water, the largest water company in the UK, is basically collapsing. Their third issue that they want to deal with is crime and corruption, but not murder, not rape, not GBV. They particularly want to address the concerns necessary to get South Africa off the grey list and to launch a digital evidence unit to support the prosecution of state capture crimes. So this is very much focused on the disputes around the mines and SAA and all of the things that they view to have been wrongly done by Jacob Zuma. It's not about crime as it pertains to you. When it comes to broader economic targets, the partnership aims to reach economic growth of 3.3% in 2025 and to add up to 2 million jobs to the economy if they are successful in getting the 3.3% growth. Currently, South Africa is growing at 0.4% in the last 2 quarters where the growth has been reported. The likelihood of 3.3% in 2025 is very low. Even the Reserve Bank has got estimates of 1.6%, and we'll talk more about this particular end of this discussion towards the end. Speaking at the launch of phase 2 of the partnership alongside President Ramaphosa was the Vice President of Business Unity South Africa and the co-convener Adrian Gore, right? And he said that economic modeling showed that a growth of 3.3% in 2025 was possible. Adrian Gore said the following: "From our perspective, the partnership has been an unequivocal success. It is quite incredible how different things feel a year later. This partnership has been different and special. Reaching 3.3% in GDP growth is a stretch, but so was ending load shedding. Our hope in phase 2 is setting stretch goals, and if we achieve them, the price is big." President Ramaphosa thanked the CEOs, many of whom attended the launch, for their support and said that the cooperative and consultative approach for which he has been frequently criticized has been vindicated. Ramaphosa said the following: "During the 6th Democratic Administration, we initiated a program of far-reaching economic reform through Operation Vulindlela. This was a government-wide initiative to accelerate growth and address the binding constraints that have held back our economy. We are now seeing the impact of this reform." Some of the other things that Ramaphosa said is that the turnaround of key power stations had been achieved through the partnership with business due to the impact of the deployment of engineers and project managers. He also said, "We have seen this collaboration in the return of units at Kusile, in the safety improvements on the coal line, and in establishing a state-of-the-art forensic analysis center. Our collaboration across the focal areas enables an environment for investment and sustainable job creation." So that's the long and short of the event and phase 2. Now we have to start dissecting some stuff. First area where we can have a conversation is Business Unity South Africa. Business Unity South Africa is primarily the vehicle which has coordinated these business leaders and these financial commitments. It has some very, very powerful business leaders. Let's go through some of them and you'll begin to see the power and strength of this entity and some concerns that it could raise. So number one, the president of Business Unity South Africa is Mxolisi Mgogo, who recently retired as the CEO of Exxaro. Exxaro is a large coal mining group, and it also mines ferrous metals. The company is also involved in the renewable energy sector. Exxaro created a renewable energy company called Senegil in 2012 and has built 2 wind farms with a combined capacity of 229 megawatts in the Eastern Cape in 2016. The ownership structure of Exxaro is complex, but I found that these companies have a stake in Exxaro: Anglo American, PricewaterhouseCoopers, BHP Billiton. These companies are significant in that they are large international companies. Let's go through them in order. Anglo American. Anglo American is a British multinational mining company with headquarters in London, England. It is the world's largest producer of platinum, with around 40% of the world output, and it's also a major producer of diamonds, copper, nickel, iron ore, polyhalite, and steel-making coal. So you can see the significance and size of this company. BHP, officially named BHP Group Limited, formerly known as BHP Billiton, is an Australian multinational mining and metals public company headquartered in Melbourne, Australia. PricewaterhouseCoopers International Limited is a British multinational consulting firm operating as partnerships under the PwC brand. It is the second largest professional services network in the world and is considered one of the big 4 accounting firms, along with Deloitte, Ernst & Young, and KPMG. Right? Another shareholder of Exxaro, according to their websites and other searches that I did, is the Vanguard Group. Vanguard Group is the second largest investment firm in the world after BlackRock. They are part of the investment companies which are internationally owned that want to own government infrastructure around the world because they view it as a stable investment, and they are cognizant of the fact that as governments are forced to focus on debt repayments, they will not be able to develop or maintain infrastructure, and as such that infrastructure can be privatized and privately owned. Earlier this year, BlackRock, the largest investment company in the world, bought Global Infrastructure Partners, which is a large infrastructure company that owns airports, etc., specifically to advance that objective. So Vanguard is another version of BlackRock and is one of the companies that is involved in this. So you can see that having the president of Business Unity South Africa being Mxolisi Mgogo gives all of these companies proximity to the president, and their interests can be platformed and prioritized because as they are sending consultants to work in the president's project management office, some of these consultants are coming from the very same companies that have interest in the mining sector, such as PricewaterhouseCoopers International. Right, let's talk about Adrian Gore, the deputy president. Adrian Gore is the CEO of Discovery Limited, and Discovery is a very large South African company which is involved in medical aid, banking, insurance, and investment. The group has 52 entities which operate in South Africa and other parts of the world. Discovery is South Africa's largest medical aid scheme and provides cover for approximately 2.8 million people. It offers a choice of 23 medical aid options. The operating profit for the financial year ending in June of 2024 was 11.6 billion rands. So Discovery is not a joke. And if you've ever been in Sandton, you know how lucrative business has been for Discovery Limited, as they have one of the most exorbitantly priced buildings and extravagant buildings in Sandton. The building has got lecture theaters better than the university. It has got a track where you can run at the top. Restaurants, you name it, is all in that building. It's not a joke company, one of the most influential companies in South Africa. And as you can see, Adrian Gore was one of the guest speakers, if not the key speaker second to President Ramaphosa. Stavros Nicolaou is one of the other people who's part of Business Unity SA leadership. He is a senior executive of strategic trade at the Aspen Group. Aspen Pharmacare Holdings Limited is a public multinational pharmaceutical headquartered in Umhlanga, South Africa, founded in 1997 and is listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So, big pharmaceutical are close to Business Unity South Africa. Another person who's identified as the leadership of Business Unity South Africa, Kaiser Moyane. He's the head of transformation, employee relations, and compliance at Sanlam. Sanlam is a South African financial services group. Sanlam is one of the largest insurers in South Africa. The group's areas of expertise include insurance, life and general, financial planning, retirement annuities, trusts, wills, short-term insurance, asset management, risk management, capital market services, investment and wealth. The group operates in South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Eswatini, Zimbabwe, Mauritius, Malawi, Zambia, Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, Morocco, Mozambique, India, Malaysia, and the UK. It has business interests in the US, Australia, Burundi, Lesotho, and the Philippines. So they also are on Business Unity South Africa, this entity that is funding the president's project management office. Another person who's just of interest, Michelle Constant. She's the CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce in South Africa. So the American Chamber of Commerce also influencing the direction and decisions of this particular entity. It's very clear that this is not all of them, but it's just some highlights just to show you the significance of this particular grouping. It's very clear that this grouping has very powerful people and that they have interests in various sectors of business which affect everyone. Big pharma, big mining, big manufacturing, big banking, all of them are in this grouping. And then the question becomes, is this entity acting as a lobbying grouping for big business by another name? Because some of the things that they are calling for or funding are in line with their neoliberal interests, where the share of the market is increased and the share of government is decreased in public life. They're advocating for privatization of the rail network, for more IPP power introduction. There are some ethical and governmental concerns which arise here. There are some concerns in respect to democracy which arise from this kind of proximity to the president and this kind of influence through financial facilitation to the president's project management office. Think about it. Think about it. So who are the companies that were pledging support to the presidential project management office? It's a long list, over 104, what do they say? 140 CEOs. Last year it was about 115 who have made those commitments. I'm not going to cover all of them. I'm going to show you some graphics, and towards the end, I'll just run a list of all of the companies that I've been able to find. So I want to focus on a few companies. The company's CEO who've pledged include a lot of interesting names. Some of the ones I want to point out are the following, which I think are very interesting or have a very interesting history, either in South Africa or globally. So Rupert-linked companies are the following: Remgro, F&B, Mediclinic, British American Tobacco. Remgro owns also a large share of eMedia Investments Proprietary Limited, eMedia Investments, which is just known as eMedia Investments. Remgro has an effective interest of 32.3% in eMedia Investments that has a wide range of media interests, which include South Africa's only free-to-air television channels, ETV, eMuses, eMovies, eNews Channel Africa, also known as ENCA. They also own the free-to-air satellite platform OpenView and the Gauteng-based radio station YFM. So Rupert-linked companies also contributed to this resource mobilization fund. Michel Leroux linked companies, Capitec. Michel Leroux is the biggest donor in the South African elections, individual donor, having donated 115 million rands in the last 3 years, mostly to the Democratic Alliance. So he's also contributed to this particular thing. Are you beginning to see patterns of connection between different political parties, the GNU that manifest the different interests? For instance, if I'm contributing to the president's project management office and I'm contributing to the DA and I own one of the largest banks, I can say that the markets want us to have a coalition of the DA and the ANC. And then media houses such as the ENCA will push that. Anyway, who else made donations? Naspers. Naspers is interesting because they own the Media 24 platform, which controls a lot of the digital and radio media in South Africa. They also used to have ownership of and monopoly on satellite TV with MultiChoice, which they then made a standalone entity when they saw that things were going badly for DSTV as it was bleeding subscriptions and losing to Netflix. So they unbundled MultiChoice in 2019. Unbundling typically occurs when a group company decides to separate a business unit, subsidiary, or investment to create shareholder value or to focus on its core operations, or because that particular entity is becoming a dumpster fire and affecting their share price and reputation. Shareholders of the parent company often receive shares in the newly independent company as part of this process. So Naspers, even though it no longer controls DSTV and MultiChoice directly, still some of the significant people in Naspers have shares in MultiChoice still, which controls the satellite television that you access, and most of the news companies are on satellite television, which is why ANN7 had to go and Newsroom Africa came in, and Newsroom Africa has relatively been soft on the Ramaphosa administration. And then the question becomes, are these things all interconnected? You have to think about this and make your own mind up. So Naspers CEO Koos Bekker is considered to be one of the Stellenbosch Mafia, one of the most powerful, richest men in South Africa, a billionaire in his own right. Michel Leroux, billionaire. Rupert, billionaire. These three men are a large part of what is commonly referred to as the Stellenbosch Mafia, a powerful group of businessmen whose roots go back to Stellenbosch. So those are some of the companies I thought would be interesting to point out. Then there are some companies which are historically linked to President Ramaphosa himself, which also made contributions to this presidential project management office, which makes you wonder that even though he stepped down from all of these board positions, and even though he then, moved away from Shanduka and they sold Shanduka to Pembani, which is run by a businessman who was also sitting with him on another board, and we don't fully know what his family owns and does not own anymore, because you don't have to disclose anything where you co-own that with the private individual when you make declarations in parliament, even as the president. So the president has only declared 76 million rands of his assets and not necessarily his whole empire, which continues to exist. Anyway, here are the companies that are historically linked to the president. Sibanye Stillwater, they own the Lonmin farm, if you still remember all of the drama around Lonmin and Marikana. Glencore was a partner of Shanduka in a consortium in 2012. They are still contributing to the president. Mondi, it's a paper and packaging company which was once owned by Anglo American, is now its own standalone entity. They're making contributions. Bidvest, Mr. Ramaphosa was a director of Bidvest. MTN, Mr. Ramaphosa was the independent non-executive director and chairman at MTN. And his Shanduka group has partial ownership of MTN shares in other parts of Africa, such as MTN Nigeria. For example, the Shanduka group purchased 2.96 billion rands minority stake in MTN Nigeria in 2012. The stake was purchased through the company's subsidiary, Shanduka Telecommunication, which is based in Mauritius and is the largest investment the company made outside of South Africa, according to Shanduka in 2012, right? So MTN has been accused of offshoring large amounts of money where they were supposed to have paid tax to avoid tax payments in South Africa. It's something that was covered by Mail and Guardian in 2015, and the story kind of went away. But you just need to be aware that that's something that happened. Standard Bank, South Africa, he used to be a director there. They are also contributing to this. SAB Miller, he used to be a director. They are contributing to the President's Project Management Office. Alexander Forbes, he used to be a director there. They're also contributing. So I want to just drill in a little bit on Glencore and show you why some of these issues should raise some question marks, and then you can make your own mind up about that. Glencore has 4 coal operations in Mpumalanga. They produce thermal coal for export and domestic power generation. They have ferroalloy mines and smelters in Northwest and in Limpopo. They are also involved in a small way in the renewable energy sector. They have a small project called Rovan, which is IPP that they've built at their vanadium mining and processing facility located near Brits in the Northwest province. This particular IPP entity produces 25 megawatts of solar photovoltaic power, right? So that's the extent of their independent power production right now. Very small, 25 megawatts. But what's of note, or what's interesting to talk about here, is that Glencore has a very dark stain on them. They paid fines in the United Kingdom and in the USA for market manipulation and for bribing senior African politicians. And this apparently happened between the years 2007 and 2018. So it went on for a very long period of time. Some of the periods of time where some of the individuals we are discussing here were ascending to power or were in proximity to power. And the most interesting thing about this is that they committed these crimes in Africa, paid billions where they were investigated in the UK and the USA, and they never paid any fines in Africa, never held accountable in Africa, right? So in the UK, Glencore Energy UK Limited was ordered to pay 280 million pounds, which is approximately 400 US dollars or 6.9 billion rands, after pleading guilty to multiple charges of bribery. The UK's Serious Fraud Office found that Glencore had engaged in corrupt practices by paying approximately $29 million or 507 million rands in bribes to secure preferential access to contracts in several African countries. The penalty was noted by the UK's Serious Fraud Office as being the largest ever imposed in a case handled by that particular office following a conviction, and it reflected a judicial acknowledgement of the significant criminality and the sophisticated devices used to disguise these actions. Think about that. The United Kingdom has a department known as the Serious Fraud Office. That office fined the largest ever fine penalty that they've ever handled on Glencore. Think about it. And they said that that fine reflected an acknowledgement of significant criminality and the use of sophisticated devices to disguise that criminality, the criminality of bribing African politicians to get access to contracts and preferential treatment in those African nations. They brutalized Africa's economy, and they never paid for it in Africa. Obviously, fraud is fraud, and they do investigate these type of things in the UK, and they caught Glencore. Between 2007 and 2018, they found that this company was one of the most vile companies. Anyway, in the US, Glencore penalties were even more substantial than they were in the UK. The company agreed to pay $1.1 billion or 19 billion rands as part of coordinated resolutions with US authorities, which included 700 million for bribery investigations, 485 million US dollars for market manipulation investigations conducted by the Department of Justice and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. The investigations that were conducted revealed that Glencore had paid at least $100 million or 1.75 billion in rands in bribes across various countries between 2007 and 2018, with some payments specifically aimed at securing business advantages. The company also faced allegations of manipulating oil prices to benefit its trading operations, which contributed to the hefty fines imposed oil prices countries such as Nigeria. Glencore, right, was never found guilty of having done anything in South Africa. I must say that. And I must also say that in 2012, they announced that they would be going into partnership with a BEE partner, Cyril Ramaphosa, as part of a consortium, and that they had completed an acquisition of an interest in Optimum Coal Mine Holdings, right? And they actually owned 49.99% of Shanduka Coal. President Cyril Ramaphosa was a partner of Glencore, and they are still at least supporting his initiatives. In terms of thinking about this topic, if a company is paying fines for bribing African politicians and using money to get preferential contracts in many African countries, even though South Africa was not mentioned in the investigations, I wonder whether or not prima facie it is reasonable to dismiss that they would have acted so ethically in South Africa while acting so unethically in every other African country where they were operating, while their base of operations in Africa was South Africa. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think about that? It's one of the companies that is contributing to the president's project management office. And they've said that, look, we've got no relationship with the president. He was not involved in any of those things. And that their contract for Optimum Coal Mine was legit and above board, right? You can go and look at everything that Glencore has been doing. But it's one of the companies that has made these contributions. Now, let's discuss the issues that arise from this. Issues that have been raised around, in general, having consultants work for government, and this definitely applies to consultants working for the president's project management office. Some of the issues have been raised in an interesting book, which is known as The Big Con, which was written by an economist named Mariana Mazzucato. So you should look for that book, The Big Con. The issues that have been raised around this kind of behavior. Number one, the weakening of government capacity through the use of consultants. Number two, the conflicts of interest that exist. Number three, the lack of accountability and transparency. Number four, the corrupt history of consulting firms. Consultants have a history of being involved in corrupt practices, whether they are financial practices, accounting practices, or even ethical practices that have deteriorated the state of some countries and have benefited powerful business interests who are also their companies. In response to some of these concerns last year, Martin Kingston, the chair of the fund, had explained that the utmost care would be taken to ensure that the fund would only appoint and fund the consultants and would have no influence over the work that they did. And this would be directed by Neocom, to which the consultants would be accountable. No policy advocacy work will be done, he assured everyone when he was asked about this by the media. Now, I want to give you my thoughts about this whole story. Number one, I don't think that it's likely that there's no influencing of direction towards the interests of the business owners or the interests of the consulting companies who also work with those same businesses. When you have these types of relationships between businesses, consulting companies, and the president of a country, the lines get very blurred. And even though Martin Kingston said there would be no policy work, which is being advocated for, it seems to me that already we have seen some advocacy of policy, for instance, IPP policy, for instance, privatization of rail. Those are policy directions that are coming from big business itself and through these consultants as well. And from what they are saying are their priorities, you can already see that there's been some kind of a shift towards some of the interests of business and these consulting companies consulting companies, when you send consultants into any office, those companies work for business as well. They get a lot of their money from business. So when you bring them to work for government, even if you don't give them a direction to say, no, we want you to do 1, 2, 3, or those companies don't directly say, we want you to do 1, 2, 3, there is an awareness by those same consultants that their customers are looking for particular outcomes and interests. So there's definitely here some question of influence that has to be raised. There has to be a question of influence. That's my first point. The second one is that there's a lot of international business influence in this mix, right? The number of businesses that are pledging support to the Presidential Project Management Office are linked to America, the UK, Australia, Europe. And the thing I want to point out is that these entities and companies don't always have the same interests as the broader South African public. They don't also have the same social and public priorities. They're interested in maximizing shareholder value for their shareholders in the UK, in Europe, in Australia, in America. And that could actually lead to them encouraging focus on issues that don't necessarily affect everyday South Africans. For instance, the grey listing is an issue. It's an issue. It affects a lot on the financial markets. And obviously, when people have US dollars in their sofas and money is flowing porously all over the place, you have an issue around illicit flows, right? I don't think it's very debatable that that's going down, right? When you have Thabo Mbeki used to speak a lot about illicit flows from South Africa. The Paradise Papers revealed that there were some South African high influence individuals who were implicated in flows of money which didn't meet the smell test. It didn't pass the smell test. So the issue of grey listing is an important issue, very important. But is it the most important issue in terms of the respect of how South Africans are living? Murder is very high, over 80 murders a day in South Africa, over 80 murders a day, right? There are so many other crimes that are very high. Education is the biggest crisis in South Africa. It's not one of the priorities of the Presidential Project Management Office. No interest whatsoever from big business in fixing that. Although there's a skills need. Question. There's an interesting book, by the way, about why the elites don't, in an extractive economy, focus on these types of things. Extractive economies don't particularly focus on fixing education because they don't actually care about fixing that particular issue because it goes against the design of the extractive economy in and of itself. That book is called Why Nations Fail by Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson, two economics professors who are award-winning economics professors. Well-researched. You must read it. If you're lazy, just read chapter 3. But read the whole book and you will see what I'm talking about. So my second point, lots of international business influence in this mix. My third point, the Project Management Office is being credited for fixing load shedding. And I think that's part of the story, not the full story, because A, there's still load shedding by another name in many areas. It's known as load reduction. And people in Soweto are still saying that they're having load reduction. B, the other part of the story is that the push to IPP integration is part of what created the load shedding problem in and of itself, right? There was this rejection of coal and an attempt under Andre de Ruyter, who was also supported by big business for years to fully focus on IPPs. Load shedding was far worse under the first years of the Ramaphosa administration than it was under Jacob Zuma or even Thabo Mbeki, partly because even though President Ramaphosa was chairperson of the Eskom War Room and there were other people in his administration who were tasked with fixing this, there wasn't really a focus on it. Some of the people who wanted to have IPPs become a large part of the South African energy mix are people like Patrice Motsepe, who said in 2009 that electricity was too cheap and that it was blocking IPPs. And I played that clip in other videos prior to this. And he said that, right? And he's a relative of President Ramaphosa. So there are some conflicts here that I think we ought to be honest about. it seems as if some of the load shedding failure was almost intentional to allow these IPPs to have space. If Eskom was fully functional for a decade or more, or if they had been a choice to go with solar at the time, not solar, nuclear, at the time at which it was suggested, perhaps there would never have been a need for IPPs. And other people who have benefited from the inclusion of IPPs in the grid are people such as Rupert through his energy exchange, because he owns the energy exchange, which then sells IPP energy to municipalities and cities and in the future homes. And all of that has been done because of the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program Act, which then made all of this legal, allowing all of these companies to become owners of electricity production, and to have Eskom being their biggest customer. And in fact, a lot more money was spent in the last financial report released by Eskom on IPPs than on coal generation, even though they were only generating 15% of the power, or less than that actually. But hey, you think about it, you tell me what you think. So the load shedding miracle has been fixed type of thing. I think it's good that load shedding is over, and it's okay, I think, for these guys to try to claim some of the credit, although I don't think that the full credit is because of brilliance in the consulting sector. I think it was a recognition that you can't actually finance, power a whole country through IPPs. There was a return back to coal, and some of the people who were doing, dodgy behavior, taking coal to Germany and not to the coal stations, who are also part of this big energy, not this coal industry, were just told to stop doing that by their comrades. And this is why we are here. I'm just saying the story is not as simple as they are making it out to be, and they may be over-claiming credit here as the NECOM. But they are right. Load shedding is gone. My fourth point, a leader is supposed to show trust in his team. The team of a president is not the private sector. It's supposed to be the public service, the public sector. The role of the state cannot and should not be simply to create an enabling environment for business. That's part of it. You have to create an enabling environment for business, but it should also be to provide services for the public at quality. Everything can't be provided by the private sector. And if you try to have everything provided by the private sector, you have market failures and you have negative externalities. The private sector cannot provide healthcare for everyone. It cannot educate everyone. You need a functional government sector. Now, if you are president, your team, your first core team, is the public sector, right? So when the president works with and through business consultants, that can foreseeably lead to neglect in respect to fixing the issues in the public sector, which is being paid for by taxpayers who have given him the mandate to govern. When a president works with and through business, it can also be an indication that there is no appetite or belief in that particular public sector, right? We can't have this idea that the public sector can't be fixed. We also can't have that idea while simultaneously having the belief that Cape Town, for instance, is well run. The president has praised Cape Town for being one of the best well-run cities in South Africa. It's run by public servants, right? We can't have the idea that the public sector can't be fixed, right? While we are praising the Democratic Alliance for running municipalities better. They're not running municipalities better through the private sector. They're just putting the right people in the right places and making sure that the money doesn't end up going towards slay queens, right? The public sector can work. And if it's your job to oversee the national public sector, you have to be somebody who invests in them. But if you then ask for consultants to come and help you fulfill your projects, what does that say about your conviction about your own government, the one that works for you? We can't have the idea that the public sector can't function while simultaneously praising Singapore, which has a functional public sector. The person whose job it is to make the public sector work is the president. That has to come from messaging, body language. That has to come from priority and the roles that you give the public sector. But if you are the president and you don't think or believe that the role of government is also to provide jobs, is also to provide services to the people, you're not necessarily going to fix the public sector. And let's be clear, the public sector has a role to provide jobs, right? In the UK, millions of people work in the public sector. In Germany, millions of people. In China, when the public sector, let's say, has 100,000 jobs and says, okay, we want to add 100,000 more teachers, that is job creation. When they say we have 100,000 nurses, let us add another 100,000 nurses, that is job creation. It's not just enabling the environment for business to operate. It's also participating in employment by having a functional and effective public sector. Of course, we are all aware that that hasn't gone according to plan. Many people have said it's because of cadre deployment, because senior technocrats are given those jobs as a result of their relationships with political parties and not as a result of their competencies or commitment to the work. Whenever you have cadre deployment, which is devoid of consequences, because in China, you mess up as a public service or they fire you, a senior executive. In Singapore, they used to blacklist people who did government deals while working for the government. They used to blacklist them. That's one of the things that led to the economic miracle, is that the public sector was strictly controlled and focus on quality was strictly maintained. But the view cannot be that the public sector has no role or that its role is only enabling. That is something that was a mantra of the neoliberal governments of Thatcher, the neoliberal government of Reagan, and were proved to be adverse to the economies of the UK and America, right? So that's something that I wanted to say and point out. Number 5, fifth point, some of the companies that are paying for consultants have conflicts of interest in this particular dispensation. For example, Discovery Limited. Adrian Gore and Discovery have opposed the National Health Insurance, which is now law in South Africa. Will this law be developed when the main speaker at the event pledging money for the President's Project Management Office is the same person opposing the implementation of the law? Can we not see that there are some issues of conflict there? By the way, I don't actually think that NHI under this particular administration would end up delivering what it's supposed to deliver. But that's not the point. My personal view is not the point. My question is, will the law progress when the main speaker at the event pledging money, 250 million, for the President's Project Management Office is the same man who is opposed in the implementation of the law? Sometimes you don't have to lobby to lobby. You don't have to say, please stop doing this or please start doing that, right? Some things are communicated through softer ways of communicating. Is this not something that leads to the same effect? Is that healthy for a democracy? My 6th point, for instance, eMedia and Media24 are some of the largest media platforms in South Africa. And they have made pledges as well through their other companies, Naspers, their mother companies, Naspers, Remgrow, right? eMedia, Media24 are involved in setting the news agenda, giving platform for issues in South Africa. And Naspers, remember, Koos Bekker is the CEO, most significant figure there. He also has significant shares and control in DSTV, MultiChoice, which controls the satellite platforms where some of these new entities make their news. Can we not see an issue there? If the owners of these businesses or the senior executives of these businesses who control the direction of their companies are part of supporting the incumbent administration and are actively putting their money into his office, that does have a risk of creating more friendly coverage right? Because they are part of the... How do you criticize something that you are part of funding? Right? You have to be positive about it. You have to be positive about the GNU because the markets which you are called for the GNU. So now are you going to criticize it or are you going to praise it? By the way, there's a book called Manufacturing Consent, which was written by Noam Chomsky and another fellow. I can't remember his name right now. That book, very difficult to get in South Africa because they don't want you to read that book, but you need to find that book. Use creative means and read it. Manufacturing Consent. Right? There's an issue here around media houses, the largest media houses contributing to the president's work while having an obligation to criticize that work. Right? And there's also another issue around conflict of interest here. Let me show you. For example, Naspers also owns Take a Lot. And they are competitors to Shein and Temu. Recently, laws were changed to make Shein and Temu products more expensive because they say that no, Shein is bringing in too many packages under 1,000 rands and those are cheap, etc., etc. So let's add an additional tax to those smaller packages so that they can become more expensive because customers are choosing Shein and Temu over Take a Lot, right? Which is owned by Naspers, which contributed to this presidential project office. By the way, Naspers also contributed to two political parties. They donated to the ANC and to the DA. Think about this. Is it not a conflict? Is it not an issue now? Because now how does Media 24, which is owned by Naspers, take an aggressive position against the president? It becomes difficult when their owner also wants Shein and Temu to be held accountable. So now when you're reading a story criticizing Shein and Temu in News 24, for example, is that criticism like legit? Or is it because Naspers wants Take a Lot to thrive and keep making money? Right? Think about it. Think about it. The president appoints ministers. One of the ministers is in charge of the Department of Trade and Industry. They control that. He appoints the governor of the Reserve Bank. He appoints the finance minister. All of these kinds of decisions taken by them, SARS. Think about it. Think about it. Right. 7th point. The other concern that I want to raise and bring to your attention is that it seems to me that there's a lot of proximity between big business and the presidency. And even though there's all of this proximity and all of these collaboration and planning and funding of the Presidential Project Management Office, unemployment has not changed. And in fact, it's gone up. GDP has not accelerated. In fact, it's almost sitting at zero. Right? In the first 2 quarters of 2024, the economy only grew at 0.4%. It's not projected to grow much higher than that for the rest of the year. Right? So when they say that the aim of the initiative is to grow the economy at 3.3%, how? Because you need to make structural changes, right? Structural changes that are not about privatizing, Eskom or Transnet or Prasa or anything like that. Structural changes which are about changing the way that big business has monopoly and oligopoly control over large sectors so that you can include more people. These changes cannot happen while the same businesses are so close to the power brokers who are responsible for changing those. Right? Some of these businesses are part of the problems leading to high costs of living and access to finance. Let me give you an example so that you can see what I'm talking about. Banks are ranked 19th in the world, 19th overall, but they are ranked 96th when it comes to the provision of loans to small business. Top 20 in the world, according to the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Index, but 96th in the provision of small businesses. To grow an economy, you need to have more small businesses funded. To grow an economy, you need that. But how do you grow an economy while you're not giving small businesses loans so that they basically, those loans, some of them are high risk, some of them are medium risk, some of them are low risk. But what happens, they take loans and then they pay back those loans at interest. It grows wealth for that particular bank, but also then grows the economy because those businesses can provide products and services, employ people, etc., etc. We're saying that unemployment is one of the biggest problems in South Africa, right? 46.2% on the expanded definition. That's high, right? 70.1% unemployment for people in the ages of 15 to 24, and it's 50% unemployment for people in the ages of 25 to 35. The median age in South Africa is 28, meaning that most of the people are unemployed, right? And poverty levels are high. So these are the problems. But banks are not necessarily giving loans to small businesses, even though it is known around the world that small businesses are the backbone of an economy. In South Africa, though, they don't want small businesses to thrive. Let me give you some examples around why this doesn't happen. An example on top of the example. The owners of the banks in South Africa, or the large shareholders or significant shareholders of the banks, they also own other businesses. For instance, the Rupert family owns or has shares in RMB and FNB, all of these big banking entities, right? Remgro, right, also owns Distel and has shares in Heineken, right? They sold Distel. Distel is an alcohol manufacturer. So I hope you're following. Rupert's own Remgro, which has shares in Heineken, Distel, and also they have shares in RMB and FirstRand banking, right? So if you wanted to start a microbrewery, let's say to produce a beer called Havana Mana from heaven, a cider for slay queens, and your slogan is from heaven, Havana Mana, right? That's what you want to make. You're not going to get a loan from FNB, which is partly owned by Rupert, who owns the Savannah beer brand. You become a competitor. Okay, let's say maybe you think, that's too much of a joke. Let's say you wanted to start a chain of private clinics to serve people in the townships. Will the same banks fund you when their owners own healthcare companies and insurance companies? Will Discovery Bank give you money to compete with Discovery Health Insurance? Will they? Or will they find reasons not to give you that money? Can you see? It's a problem when the owners of the banks are the owners of the businesses, and then there's an expectation that those businesses actually open the economy for other players. They won't. They don't. Which is why South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world and why it is an extractive economy. And extractive economies, instrumentally, economists have proved that they do not grow. They only grow the profits of those who control particular entities, because they then use those entities to extract wealth from the majority. Hence, extractive economy. The opposite of an extractive economy is an inclusive economy, where many people have opportunities to participate in the economy at various levels, including as owners. In an inclusive economy, you have more competition. That would apply to banking, that would apply to construction, that would apply to retail. In South Africa, in the supermarket retail sector, 4. In the banking sector, 4. Think about it. It's 4. Big 4, big 4, big 4, big 4, sometimes big 7, big 8. But in general, this economy is highly concentrated in the hands of a few individuals, some of whom are from Stellenbosch, who got their economic advantages as a result of the activities of the Nationalist Party, the secret society known as the Broederbond. I'm going to do a special episode on them, and ideologies which were very hateful in and of themselves. So there's an issue here. There's an issue here. Do you not see the issue? Do you not see it? Lots of companies have pledged. Lots of companies have pledged. Then the questions which then remain at the end of this episode. When big businesses are so close to power, whose interests are they serving? Your interests or their own? When big business controls finance and the media and has proximity to the presidency, to the point where they can give him money directly for his projects, is that healthy for democracy? I don't know. What do you think? Let's have a conversation. Till the next one.